In the ancient world, there was a name that, when whispered, carried with it a unique and chilling terror. A name that meant not just conquest, but subjugation, just defeat, but annihilation. That name was Assyria. For 300 years, from the 9th to the 7th century BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was the undisputed superpower of the known world. They were the apex predators of Mesopotamia. But their dominance was not born of luck, nor was it simply the result of a single great leader. It was the product of something new, something the world had never seen before. The Assyrians didn't just have an army, they engineered a machine, perfectly integrated system of professional soldiers, revolutionary technology, brilliant siegecraft, and a calculated psychology of absolute terror. It was the world's first true superweapon, a blueprint for total war that would be copied by empires for the next 2,000 years. Welcome to the Histofy. Today we dissect the components of this ancient war machine and tell the story of the empire that lived and died by the sword. The rise of Assyria from a minor city-state on the Tigris River to a globe-spanning empire was shockingly rapid. How did they do it? They changed the very rules of warfare. While their neighbors were still fielding seasonal levies of farmers who would fight in the summer and go home for the harvest, the Assyrians made a revolutionary leap. They created the world's first massive, permanent, professional standing army. This was a force of hundreds of thousands of men whose only job year-round was to train, to march, and to conquer. They were paid and supplied by the state, loyal only to the Assyrian king. This professionalization allowed them to campaign relentlessly in any season and to develop a level of skill and discipline their part-time enemies could never hope to match. Yes. But a large army is useless without the tools of war. The Bronze Age was ending, and a new metal was beginning to define the battlefield: iron. While other kingdoms used iron sparingly for the weapons of their kings and champions, the Assyrians industrialized its production. They were the first to equip their entire army, from the lowest foot soldier to the highest general, with iron weapons. Iron swords that didn't break against bronze, iron-tipped spears, and iron-plated helmets. Iron was cheaper, stronger, and more plentiful than bronze, allowing the Assyrians to field a massive Assyrians-led, a well-equipped army that could literally shatter the defenses of their Bronze Age foes. This technological superiority was most evident in their mastery of siege warfare. Before the Assyrians, a city with high, thick walls could hope to hold out against an invading army for years. The Assyrians made such hopes obsolete. They were the siege masters of the ancient world, the inventors of a whole new science of urban assault. They built colossal, multi-story siege towers on wheels, covered in wet leather hides to protect them from fire. From the top of these towers, archers could shoot down on the city's defenders. At the base was their most fearsome invention: the battering ram. Not just a simple log, but a massive, armored, house-sized machine with a great, swinging, iron-tipped head, capable of reducing stone walls and bronze gates to rubble. If towers and rams didn't work, they would employ sappers engineers who would dig tunnels beneath the city walls, collapsing them from below. Or they would simply build massive earthen ramps, allowing their soldiers to walk right over the top of the defenses. For the Assyrians, no city was impenetrable. The question was not if the walls would fall, but when. On the open battlefield, they perfected the art of combined arms, using different military units in perfect, deadly harmony. Their core was a disciplined heavy infantry, a wall of spears and shields. This was supported by massive formations of archers, who would rain down arrows to disrupt enemy formations. But their true innovation was their cavalry. They were among the first to develop a true cavalry force, horsemen who could ride and fight with lances and bows, providing unparalleled speed and flanking capability. And leading the charge was the terrifying symbol of Assyrian might: the heavy war chariot, a mobile missile platform that would crash into enemy lines, sowing chaos and terror. Infantry, archers, cavalry, chariots, all working together as one unstoppable machine. But the Assyrians' most effective weapon was not made of iron or wood. It was an idea. The idea of absolute, inescapable, and horrific terror. The Assyrian kings understood that the greatest victory is the one you don't have to fight. Their goal was to cultivate a reputation so fearsome that cities would surrender the moment the Assyrian army appeared on the horizon. And they achieved this through a calculated, state-sponsored policy of psychological warfare. One of their primary tools was mass deportation. When they conquered a rebellious kingdom, it was standard practice to round up the entire population, tens of thousands of men, women and children, and forcibly march them to a different, distant part of the empire. Their homes would then be given to Assyrian colonists. This policy served two purposes. It provided slave labor for the empire's grand building projects. And, more importantly, it destroyed a people's national identity, breaking their connection to their ancestral land and their gods, making future rebellion almost impossible. For those who dared to resist, the punishment was broadcast to the world as a grim warning. The Assyrians were masters of brutal, exemplary punishment. Defeated kings and nobles were subjected to horrific fates. They were flayed alive, their skin displayed on the walls of the conquered city. They were impaled on stakes, left to die in agony outside the city gates. They were beheaded, their heads piled into gruesome pyramids. And these were not secret acts. The Assyrians wanted the world to know. In their capital cities like Nineveh, they created masterpieces of propaganda. The walls of their palaces were covered in magnificent, intricate, and deeply disturbing stone reliefs. These carvings were not just art, they were advertisements of terror. They depicted in gory detail every aspect of Assyrian conquest, their siege engines smashing cities, their soldiers slaughtering their enemies, and lines of captives being led away in chains. One famous relief shows the king, Ashurbanipal, relaxing in his garden, while the severed head of his defeated enemy hangs from a nearby tree like a grisly ornament. These reliefs were shown to foreign ambassadors and visiting dignitaries. The message was unmistakable. This is what we did to them. This is what we will do to you if you defy us. Through a combination of overwhelming military force and carefully crafted propaganda of terror, the Assyrians held their vast empire together. For nearly 300 years, the Assyrian War Machine seemed invincible. It had crushed every kingdom from the mountains of Iran to the banks of the Nile. But the very foundation of its power fear was also its greatest weakness. An empire ruled by pure terror does not create loyal subjects. It creates a world of silent, resentful enemies, all waiting for a single moment of weakness. And by the late 7th century BC, that moment had arrived. The empire was overstretched, its resources drained by constant warfare and rebellion on every frontier. A series of weaker kings and internal civil wars weakened this central authority. Seeing their chance, the Assyrians had terrorized for so long rose up. The final blow came from a grand coalition of their most bitter enemies, led by the Babylonians from the south and the Medes from the east. For centuries, they had been vassals of Assyria. Now they were coming for revenge. The hunters became the hunted. The great cities of Assyria, once thought to be impregnable fortresses, were now themselves under siege. In 612 BC, the coalition army reached the crown jewel of the empire, the magnificent capital city of Nineveh. The city that had boasted of its conquests and displayed the severed heads of its enemies was now surrounded. The siege was epic and brutal. After months of fighting, the attackers finally breached the walls. The vengeance they unleashed was of a kind the Assyrians themselves would have recognized. The city was sacked, burned to the ground, and so utterly destroyed that its location was lost to history for over 2,000 years. The Assyrian Empire, the great terror of the ancient world, collapsed with a speed that shocked its contemporaries. The empire that had lived by the sword died by the sword, its people scattered, its culture almost completely erased from history. The Assyrian Empire was gone, but the blueprint for its superweapon, the war machine, endured. The empires that followed, the Babylonians, the Persians, and later the Macedonians and the Romans, all studied and copied the Assyrian model. The idea of a massive, professional standing army. The mastery of siege engineering, the sophisticated use of combined arms and cavalry, the logistical systems of roads and supply depots, and most chillingly, the use of psychological warfare and terror as a tool of state policy. These were all Assyrian innovations. The Assyrians proved that it was possible to build and maintain a vast, multi-ethnic empire through sheer, organized, and ruthless military power. They created the terrifyingly effective blueprint for conquest and control, a model whose dark echo can be traced through the military doctrines of empires and nations for the next 2.5 millennia. They were the original masters of total war, and their legacy, for good or for ill, has shaped the very nature of conflict ever since. At the Histofy, we believe in understanding the full story, even its darkest chapters. If you found this deep dive compelling, subscribe and hit the bell. More epic histories are on the way. This was the Histofy. I'll see you in the next one.